more than a generation away. And yet dreams travel faster than light. And even now, scientists and planners are shaping the lives of our children who will live in the 21st century.
If I had to explain Fallout's pre-war America in a single sentence, I'd say it was yesterday's dream of tomorrow. Have you ever seen Back to the Future 2? With the flying cars, hoverboards, and auto-fitting shoes? Well, the movie was made by people of 1989, picturing what 2015 would be like. It was exaggerated, but it was also optimistic. It was 80s people dreaming up this bright future that could have been ahead of them, and all the cool stuff that was possible in it. Now, let's picture people of the 50s, right? But they're not imagining 2015. They're picturing the far future of 2077, because that was some of the thought process that went into designing Fallout's pre-war aesthetic. It wasn't the 50s, but just dropped into 2077. It was a future, kind of, befitting the hopes and optimism of the past. How people back then would have dreamt about this faraway age and all its potential. All the tools and gizmos that could come about, which Fallout delivers. You got robot butlers as household luxuries, nuclear-powered cars lining the roads. Just look at the military tech on offer. From power armor, to jetpacks, to laser guns. It's like something out of a comic book. Then you could flip on the TV to watch... See, Fallout's pre-war America was a world of contrasts, for beneath the suburban shine and literal shine of Nuka-Cola Quantum was corruption and darkness, just like in our world. Across its 13 commonwealths, the United States of America was rotting from the inside out. Resources were vanishing, food and energy riots growing, and for all the miracle devices America could offer, it still couldn't save itself from the end of the world. Pre-war America really was yesterday's dream of tomorrow, but it was a nightmare, and here's why. Now, before we fully dive in, I do want to note that this video will discuss canon lore, but there will inevitably be speculation or discussions about ideas that may be non-canon, in order to fill in the gaps. For example, we'll be taking a big look at what's said in the Fallout Bible, which isn't canon, but something Bethesda has paid attention to when making their games. Finally, a big shout out to these guys for inspiring this video. If you have any topics or ideas you'd like me to cover in the future, always feel free to let me know in the comments below, and it might just become a video like this one. Now, let's get right into it. Where do we start with Fallout's pre-war America? Some might argue, start with the point of divergence, when our timeline and Fallout's officially parted way and became two separate worlds. Except we don't quite know when that is. We know it came after World War II, but it's always been intended as a mystery. I could speculate, only I'd argue we should start even earlier. Before the divergence, before the 20th century, even before the ancient aliens. To understand pre-war America, we have to understand a theme written into the laws of reality of Fallout's universe. Things are pretty cool until they're not. For example, radiation doesn't just result in mutations like birth defects or horrific body destruction like it does in our universe. In Fallout's universe, it can lead to immortal life as a ghoul. Sounds pretty cool, right? Until you find out about the horrific, soul-crushing transformation into feral ghouls. Kinda puts a damper on the whole thing. Radiation can also create giant animals, which could be neat until you realize it isn't. 9mm pistols can cause catastrophic damage to the human body, including launching heads off shoulders for some reason. You get the picture. Things are pretty cool until they're not. And it's exactly the same way with pre-war American history. In our history, major events like the Watergate scandal and the Vietnam War helped hurt the idea of American exceptionalism, the idea of America's superior role in the world and moral mission to lead it. Except in Fallout's history, the Watergate scandal and the Vietnam War didn't happen. I will point out really quick, this info comes from interviews with Walton Goggins and Jonathan Nolan for Amazon's Fallout show. It's contradictory to the game Fallout Tactics, which does feature speeches about the Vietnam War in its intro.
We have declared the war in Vietnam.
But we don't.
Except Tactics is also partially canon, compared to the show being fully canon. So until Bethesda drops a retcon nuke, I'm sticking with it. The loss of confidence in America, seeing presidential conspiracy, and teenagers forced to die in a war even its own perpetuators went on to say was wrong, just wouldn't have occurred. Woodstock, the countercultural festival that became a symbol of protest, wouldn't have happened either. People could keep fully believing in America, and for better or worse, would continue to do so for nearly another century. Sure, not everything was perfect. There most definitely would have been some counterculture here and there, like we see in the games. People are people at the end of the day. There were also some historical hiccups, like the first American to make it to space, Carl Bell, dying on re-entry in Fallout's timeline, unlike the first American to make it in our timeline, Alan Shepard. Plus, the 50 states became split up and divided into 13 commonwealths in 1969, making the 50 Nifty United States song tragically outdated. But for the most part, things were good. And to quote Walton Goggins, this series explores the premise of American exceptionalism and Pax Americana. If American exceptionalism was undisturbed in this timeline, then so was Pax Americana, the peace maintained by US dominance. While this is largely speculation on my part, there's no mention of the Korean War or the War on Terror anywhere in the Fallout franchise, except the war in Iraq with a clip of a George Bush speech in Fallout Tactics. But Vietnam also got retconned, so you know the drill. Schrodinger's retcon. Getting back to the Vietnam War though, knowing it didn't happen, then surely American minds wouldn't have been dropped into Vietnam and Cambodia, which in turn allowed the anti-Western propaganda of the communist Khmer Rouge to work overtime, helped get them into power, and led to the Cambodian genocide. It's one of the most horrific tragedies of our 20th century. But in Fallout's timeline, there's a likelihood it never happened, along with countless other butterfly effects like that. Perhaps things weren't just better for America in Fallout's universe, but better across the entire world. Even Tim Kaine, while declaring his ideas non-canon, has stated how he would like future games to explore different countries and the cool technology they may have created. That they could have been capable of having awesome futures like America up to a point. So yeah, life in Fallout's universe was probably pretty darn good for a while. Which begs the question, what was that life like? Or more specifically, to get this video scope back on track, what was it like to be an average American citizen? And this is where things get a little tricky, because for the most part, we only have the culture and technology of the 2070s to go off of. But we do have some clues here and there about what was on offer earlier in the century. According to a Fallout 1 design document about the Mr. Handy, General Atomics International released the Mr. Handy series of robots in 2037, as a construction and maintenance unit known for its reliability. It was so reliable, in fact, it only needed a single bug fix for a glitch causing interference to its multiple arms, with quote, no major problems since then. My Fallout 3 birthday begs to differ, but what can you do? Mr. Handys could self-maintain themselves and fix other units, perform fuel replacement, and were nuclear powered. Later, in 2044, Nuka-Cola was released upon the world, becoming a smash hit destined to be one of the great soda products on the planet. 3 years later, Robco Industries, responsible for the Pip-Boy and various robot series of its own, became one of the most profitable corporations on Earth. If you were a citizen in the US, slowly but surely you'd be seeing the rise of robotics and technologies beyond your wildest imagination. Granted, you might have been seeing it through black and white television sets or black and green computer screens, and while wearing a 50s outfit for some reason, because, there's no logical reason for it. The artists thought it was cool. But things were solid. Many would be living through the American dream made manifest, seeing literal dreams become reality. Who wouldn't want a piece of that pie? Well, then came the 2050s, and this is where things take a turn for the worse. Petroleum, the lifeblood of cars, industry, and society itself, was starting to run out. In large part, it seems overpopulation played a factor, with Fallout 2's intro outright blaming it for causing the apocalypse.
The end of the world occurred pretty much as we had predicted. Too many humans, not enough space or resources to go around.
As sad as it is, the lack of global conflict within Fallout's universe likely allowed for unchecked population growth, which utterly drained resources. So much so that in 2051, the US destabilized Mexico to effectively seize its oil. A year later, in 2052, a popular documentary revealed to many Americans how Texas oil fields had withered away. And if that wasn't enough for folks to figure just how dire the energy crisis truly was, the resource wars happened. Beginning in April 2052, the resource wars kickstarted an avalanche of chaos. Small nations went bankrupt, and Europe would enter a devastating war with the Middle East due to their rising oil prices. By the end of July, there was no longer a United Nations. The organization made to promote world peace and cooperation, the supposed best hope for brokering peace in Europe's oil war, had completely disbanded. Now, granted, this is scary stuff, but if you were an American citizen at this point in time, you're probably not feeling the effects just yet. Emphasis on probably. Maybe if you're an oil worker, or who knows, maybe there were issues cropping up in everyday life. Gas prices were probably driving some people mad. However, it's likely you wouldn't have really felt this downturn in the Fallout universe until 2053, when the new plague struck. A devastating new virus that began killing tens of thousands. As a result, the US closed its borders and declared its first ever national quarantine. Rumors flared that the plague may have been a genetically engineered weapon. That's still up for debate, but most definitely it was treated as a social engineering weapon by the US government, who would effectively use the paranoia surrounding the virus for its own ends. Dubbing it a social disease, the government discouraged social gatherings and encouraged isolation instead. This helped mitigate the chances of the virus spreading, yet it holed people away, made them more powerless. Which makes you think, maybe it really was a US bioweapon to discourage gas-wasting joyrides and ice cream socials. Who knows? What I do know is that 2053 really sucked, and it ended with a bang. In Tel Aviv, the economic center of Israel, destroyed by a nuclear terrorist attack. I want to jump out of Bible reader mode for a second here and kind of grapple with this, because you would think America, being closely allied with Israel in our timeline, would be forced into conflict here. Their ally getting a city nuked off the face of the planet would most definitely warrant military action, except it's never quite stated what happens other than there being limited nuclear exchange in the Middle East in 2054, raising fears across the world. There's no mention of our involvement anywhere, and in fact, it seems that America just starts prepping after this event, causing the Vaults to be born. I think this might be a sign of the timelines. Either America and Israel aren't that close in Fallout's universe, or they were close, but now America is going full preservation mode here, as evidenced by all the other self-preservationist stuff they've been getting up to lately. Whatever the case might be, the Middle East situation and the new plague bring about Project Safeguard, an initiative by the US government to create underground shelters known as vaults to house the civilian population in the event of an apocalyptic crisis. They were very costly to make, well in the hundreds of billions. Worse yet, there wouldn't nearly be enough vaults to house even a quarter of the US population. Only less than 1% of it would be protected in the event of a global war. Nevertheless, the US continued to clash with neighboring countries. Only this time, Canada was in their sights. In 2059, the Anchorage Front was established, with the US upping its military presence in Alaska to protect the Alaskan pipeline, as well as pressuring Canada to accept that presence. But evidently, it's not enough. In 2060, gas-fueled cars across the world stop moving. Traffic flat out stops for a short amount of time. And although it's not stated, this is probably where there's some panic. Imagine walking to your job that's a 30-minute drive. And for some, that's a best-case scenario. This was likely a scary time for a lot of folks, and leaders especially. If transportation is halted to such an extent that there's no traffic, you're looking at businesses being short-staffed, hospitals underprepared, emergency services hindered, and so much more. It's a domino effect we don't tend to think about because it's not good to think about. Fortunately, electric and fusion cars begin to get manufactured the same year. So world chaos somewhat averted, but factories can only make limited amounts of these vehicles, so the pressure on fusion research increases. And that pressure probably further increases when later in the year, the Euro-Middle Eastern War ends with the Middle Eastern oil fields completely dried up, and both sides reduced almost to ruin. There's not even a goal in the conflict anymore. Nearly everything was lost. The rest of the 2060s wouldn't fare much better. In the US, the new plague continues to spread and increases national paranoia. Most vaults are completed in August 2063, with advertisements for vault residency surely playing into that paranoia and seizing worried families' life earnings. In 2065, power rationing becomes enforced due to an incident where New York City was almost Chernobyled due to a near meltdown at its nuclear reactor. In a post-gasoline world, electricity demands are through the roof, but the New York incident causes the US government to enforce rationing to prevent cases like it. Speaking of power armor begins development the same year. The idea for a literal man-based tank is thought up and prototyped. And on the one hand, it's sick. They eventually get them made, and they're so powerful they can wipe out entire towns like man-sized killdozers. But to temper my inner nerd, the US is merely making the suits for inevitable war and not so good things. So their development, though impressive, isn't all that great. Next year in 2066, oil is still drying up worldwide. China is on the brink due to an energy crisis caused by their over-reliance on fossil fuels, and the US is unwilling to export oil to them to help. General talks and relations between the two break down, which is not helped by the fact the US unveils the first fusion cell the same year, allowing US infrastructure to incorporate fusion power. It's like the US denying water to a dying man and then revealing they had a super duper water constructor in their pocket. It's kind of a messed up move. Now granted, it's a slow process to incorporate this fusion power at all. Truth be told, despite the desperate need for power, few places in the US would get fusion power by the end of the world. Regardless, China is so desperate it invades Alaska in the winter of 2066 for its oil. With the Anchorage frontline now a true battleground, relations are further soured between America and Canada, when the latter proves reluctant to let American troops on Canadian soil or allow American planes in Canadian airspace. Canada does eventually back down, but their actions this year guarantee their inevitable doom a decade later. The road to Canadian annexation begins in 2067. 2 years later, Canada's resources are largely drained for the sake of the American war effort, with many American civilians even calling Canada Little America. Finally, we get to 2070, the final decade before the end. Canadian riots erupt in 2072 over America's increasing resource demands, with an attempted sabotage attempt on the Alaskan pipeline being used as justification for the official annexation of Canada, which is completed in January 2076. Any post-conquest protesters are shot on sight and other atrocities are committed, filmed for the world to see. Some protest the horrors, while others celebrate it. In fact, an unarmed Canadian rebel being executed and laughed at is used in an American commercial to buy war bonds. Meanwhile, whereas the US military struggled in its initial deployment on the Chinese mainland 2 years prior, the release of the T-51 power armor would start to turn the tides in their favor. America could finally begin to break through Chinese forces and disrupt their supply lines. With the commie threat seemingly on the verge of defeat, what could possibly go wrong? Well, remember what I said earlier? How in Fallout, things sound cool until they're not. Yeah, so as nice as it sounds that America's on the up and up during the war, life in late 2070s America isn't nice at all. What do you think the value of a single copy of the Capital Post, a Washington, D.C. based newspaper was? Because it sure didn't deserve to be $56. And trust me, you don't want to know what petroleum cost. Then combine the hyperinflation with increasing automation, where people are outright being replaced by robot workers. where you could lose your job and be forced to go to a food bank to get something to eat, standing in line for hours, only to learn there's a food shortage because of the food rationing. Now, historically, food rationing isn't uncommon during global war. During World War II, for example, the US government implemented food rationing to make it simpler for food to be sent overseas to the troops. It was even seen as patriotic, and surely it was the same deal in late 21st century hyper-nationalist America. It was cool until it wasn't, because eventually people got tired of rationing their food and power. Of food shortages even in the face of America taking more land for itself. I'd imagine the stresses of the time, including the new plague, which was increasing national paranoia, likely didn't help reactions towards the rationing. We know common people thought the plague was a weapon, but imagine reactions to the likes of food rationing after about a decade. The thought was likely less, I'm doing my part, and more, if you control the food, you control the people. The situation simply became too much for the American public. In August 2076, food and energy riots begin in major cities across the US. Soon, martial law is declared. The chaos doesn't even hold when Alaska is fully reclaimed from the Chinese in January 2077, with power armor units deployed domestically for the first time that very month. Soldiers originally fighting overseas are suddenly fighting Americans at home, with issues only rising from there. The food riots worsen, and many civilians are killed. To make matters worse, in February, a bombshell is dropped on the world. An unknown source leaks info that the US has been experimenting for years on a virus known as FEV, the Forced Evolutionary Virus. It was created to counteract China's biological weapons, and originally intended as a way of immunizing people against the new plague. But it's become so much more. Capable of altering living creatures into living weapons. Super soldiers with more strength, intelligence, and even the ability to have mental powers. It's a devastating revelation, leading to massive protests across the entire world. Full-on governments are turning against the US now, with people outright blaming it for the new plague. How much of a conspiracy does it seem now when it turns out America was secretly making a bioweapon for years? Not to mention, what America has is a brand new superweapon that it's getting ready to use against the Chinese, who are desperate to win at any cost. If you think they were desperate invading Alaska in the 2060s, how desperate do you think they are now that they're facing defeat after defeat, and then learning America has yet another trick up its sleeve? They got nothing to lose at this point, and the US government knows it, because in March 2077, the US president and American deep state, known as the Enclave, go into hiding. Which leads us to October 2077. This is the final month before a post-nuclear world. This is the culture and society that is now ruins we explore throughout the series. I spent a lot of this video getting to this point, explaining what happened decade to decade, but our greatest understanding of this time is what we can find from the ruins of this month. Also, we can finally answer the dang question this video is about. Why is pre-war America a nightmare? It was a nightmare because despite the cool retrofuturism, you would have lived an exhausting and anxiety-ridden existence experiencing it. As a US citizen, unless you're loaded like Coop Howard or a war hero like Nate living it up in Sanctuary Hills, filled with luxurious suburban houses of tomorrow, you're likely struggling to make ends meet, even affording basic food and fuel. Even when the war is going good with territory and resources seized, resources are getting more expensive or scarcer at home. There's riots you hear about on the news or see in the streets. Even a White House spokesman has to make a statement where he says the president is struggling too with the rationing, substituting cube steak for prime rib. Things sound more phony and artificial, but you must act that way as well to survive. There's a hotline people can report suspected communists to, and any suspicious behavior, with big names losing their entire livelihoods over a wrong word or relationship. Being too critical or anti-government equates to being anti-American now, and at some level, maybe you believe it too with all the propaganda you've grown up on. So it's not only a chaotic time where you don't know who's a commie and who's an American patriot with legitimate concerns, You can't say what's on your mind if you even have anything to say at all. Plus, across the nation, companies are financially struggling themselves, or have grown even more selfish and profit-driven in the face of human hardship. At a bare minimum, the thought of losing your job might not be some far-off fear anymore. You'd likely be on edge, having to worry about how you act, what you say, how you look, wondering if this is the day you're fired because of some workplace gossip painting you as a pinko, or because your boss wants to save up for coolant. Consider the Wartime Workers Act, where on top of laborers being made to work 12-hour shifts, with no paid sick time available, workers could be charged with treason and even executed. Any workplace fears aren't unwarranted in this universe. Any gut feeling you may have while working that people could want you gone, or really gone, isn't wrong. There's genuine reason to worry about that. It would especially be hard not to worry after seeing automation replacing human workers. Look what happens to Sunset Sarsaparilla delivery drivers being let go. Entire automated hospitals like in Boston, or what was happening in Appalachia. As early as the 2060s, many were losing their jobs and facing homelessness due to the rapid automation of the region. Now, in the grand scheme of things, automation was a means for these corporations to save money, and evidently, major companies and their executives would begin cutting corners in the lead up to the Great War. Even a titan like John Caleb Bradburton, CEO of Nuka-Cola, diverted funds from the Nuka World theme park, helping to guarantee customer safety so that he could fund research for personal life extension technology. Horrifically enough, even Voltec wasn't above skimping out on expenses. The company the US government outsourced the survival of the country to was still greedy at the end of the day. While it's up in the air whether it's canon or not, Vault Zero is a major plot point in Fallout Tactics, and the central vault meant to oversee data from every other vault in the franchise. See, Voltec's master plan was, when the time was right and radiation was low, the vault data would be used by the calculator, an advanced piece of software powered by human brains meant to serve as the executor of America's reconstruction, if not humanity's reconstruction. It would lead people out of the vaults with a robot army, kill any mutants standing in the way, and aid them in rebuilding what was lost. But here's the problem. The original budget for the calculator and its systems was $24 billion, before budget cuts and reallocation made it $2.3 billion instead. Where did all the money go? To senior committee members, as well as the construction of piano bars and indoor hunting grounds for Vault Zero. This is already bad, but maybe it's non-canon. What isn't non-canon, though, is the fact the vaults weren't truly safety shelters. They were intended as human testing grounds. So if Vault Zero ends up being canon, that would mean these vaults and human experiments where hundreds of people have lost their lives were all for nothing. The plan to use this suffering for some sort of purpose was financially neglected in favor of simple pleasures for the elite. Speaking of the vault experiments though, it's part of a worrying trend in the late 21st century. Corporate power was at an all-time high, with regular citizens becoming playthings. Vault-Tec being the most obvious example. Its executives basically act like they're above humanity, and have plans to take control of its future. They allow other corporate leaders to buy up vaults to create their own experiments and subject innocent people to them. But there's other glaring signs of corporate evil. There's the likes of Nuka-Cola Quantum being genuinely radioactive to drink and still somehow sold to the public. There's the Pulowski preservation shelters, which didn't do all that much. There's the moral evil of violence in the media. All the while, you're probably wondering, how can this happen? Why isn't the US government regulating this nonsense? Unfortunately, according to Tim Kaine, the US government couldn't do anything because the corporations were too powerful. In his video, Games Predicting Our Future, he says, quote, "Fallout was us just seeing the corporations were getting bigger and bigger, and we're kinda leveraging that power to make the government weaker so laws didn't affect them, and they could pollute more and do more dangerous things, and the government couldn't do anything to stop them." Then consider how the Enclave and Vault-Tec are buddied up, and you realize the game was rigged from the start. If you were an average US citizen, you were just about screwed. And if you were a Chinese American, you may have been doubly screwed. Sometime in the late 21st century, Executive Order 99066 allowed for the imprisonment of Chinese Americans in concentration camps across the nation. Even human experiments could be performed on prisoners, as was the case in Big Mountain's Little Yangtze, also known as the Human Farm, where bomb collars were strapped onto the prisoners, forcing them to stay in the confines of their living hell. So yeah, if it isn't clear, life would have been miserable in pre-war America. It was an anxiety-inducing pressure cooker of a society to live in, with the likes of national paranoia and social unrest. You had a decades-long plague going on, violent riots, energy and food shortages, strict rationing, corporate overreach, and $50 newspapers. It was simply too much. So this American nightmare became an American wasteland. We don't really know who dropped the bombs first. Tim Kaine and Enclave President Dick Richardson say it was China, while the Fallout show hints that Voltec may have caused the Great War. But no matter who caused the end, it came anyways, and it created my favorite post-apocalyptic setting out of any franchise. It's been very fun talking about pre-war America, if a little scary at points. See, I've heard it said that our world is becoming a lot like Fallout's, that America and the world as we know it may be sharing a little too much in common with the pre-war lore. Tim Kaine did state that the lore of his universe came from looking at the state of America during Fallout's development in the 1990s, exaggerating trends to make the fictional world more interesting. Except, remember that quote I used earlier from Tim about the power of corporations? That wasn't the full quote. This was. Yeah, even the creator is kinda taken aback by how stuff in his fictional game is becoming reality. It's not Deus Ex, but it's something. The good news is, the nukes haven't flown just yet. A new year is upon us, and we're still pre-war as of now. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's make the most of it. I always say in these videos to be careful out there, and it's important. You don't want to run into mods muggers or anything. But also, without trying to be tacky about it, don't be so consumed by the bombs or the rippers out there that you forget to smell the roses. Be kind to others, and please make sure to enjoy your time as much as you can. Because while pre-war America was a nightmare, it was still life for millions of good people. And they deserved a happy ending just like you do. The clock is ticking. Make sure you make it count. And that's about it for 2025. But this has been an extremely good year for the channel. We've hit 20,000 subscribers, and I can't thank you guys enough for it. So for any new viewers, any longtime viewers, I just want to say thank you. Because just watching these videos has helped a dream of mine come true. I never thought I'd make it this far, but here we are. Also, something else, because this is the season for it, and something I maybe haven't been doing as much as I should, but I just wanted to give thanks to God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who have definitely been helping me out and providing miracles, I would say, for my journey. So a real big thanks to them as well. Now, before I end the video, I do want to say, this being the season of giving, while I usually make this ending a bit of like an e-begging bit of the video, talking about donations and whatnot, I thought I'd switch things up this time around. You know, get into the Christmas spirit and give you guys something instead. I've been reading comments that a lot of people like to listen to my stuff for long work shifts or to help relax. So now my best stuff is up on Spotify. A link is included in the description below, and I'll be uploading this video and my future work onto it. Sorry to those expecting a better gift, I didn't have the budget for free gas money. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed the video. I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
What's next? The things you've seen are technically possible today. It remains only to apply what we now know to fulfill these dreams of tomorrow. The world of 1999 and beyond is limited only by the boundaries of our imagination today.